It's time to bring out the BetterWorldian in all of us. Welcome to BetterWorldians Radio with your hosts, Ray, Mary Sue, and Gregory Hansel. BetterWorldians Radio inspires you with the people and ideas that are making the world a better place. You'll hear how small acts can make a big difference every day. Now, here are Ray, Mary Sue, and Gregory.
Hi, and welcome to BetterWorldians Radio. BetterWorldians Radio is a weekly broadcast whose mission is to uplift and inspire you to make the world a better place. I'm Greg Hansel, joined today by my co-host, Mary Sue Hansel. BetterWorldians Radio is brought to you by BetterWorldians Foundation and is co-hosted by the family team that created the popular social game on Facebook called A Better World. It rewards players for doing good deeds while helping to raise money and awareness for charities. To date, over 40 million good deeds have been done in a better world by more than 4 million people in over 100 countries. This week on BetterWorldians Radio, we welcome Dr. Robert Keith Wallace, co-author of Dharma Parenting, Understand Your Child's Brilliant Brain for Greater Happiness, Health, Success, and Fulfillment. Dr. Wallace is a pioneering researcher on the physiology of consciousness. His research has inspired hundreds of studies on the benefits of meditation and other mind-body techniques. Dr. Wallace's findings have been published in Science, the American Journal of Physiology, and Scientific American. He received his B.S. in physics and his Ph.D. in physiology from UCLA and conducted postgraduate research at Harvard University. Dr. Wallace is the founding president of Maharishi University of Management in Fairfield, Iowa. Dr. Wallace co-wrote Dharma Parenting with Dr. Frederick Travis.
Hi, Dr. Wallace. Thanks for joining us today on BetterWorldians Radio.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Now, Dr. Wallace, to begin with, can you explain what Dharma parenting is and how it could nurture our children?
Sure. The word Dharma is a curious word. It's a word we're not very familiar with. But like yoga and meditation, those two words not so long ago were also unfamiliar, and now they're very familiar to everyone. Dharma is a word that comes from India, but it's used throughout the East. It's in China and Japan, Thailand, everywhere. And it really has multiple meanings. The meaning we use for it has to do with the journey of life that you take. And we think of Dharma parenting as the kind of parenting that helps your child begin their journey in the most successful, happy, and fulfilled manner. We really see Dharma as encompassing all the things you do, all the tools you use, all the knowledge you have to really help your child on that journey, to find out who they are and what they want to become in life.
Mm-hmm. In your book, Dharma Parenting, Dharma is also used as an acronym for 6 parenting tools, and I thought we'd chat a little bit about those. The first one is to discover your child's own body type and your body type. Can you describe those 3 body types in the book, the Vata, the Pitta, and the Kapha?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Yeah, the acronym is sort of fun for us. We kind of enjoy making it as simple as possible. And so the first one for D is discover we call it your brain body type. And it's a composition of 2 areas of knowledge. First of all, we're scientists. We've, studied the brain. We're very interested in the development of the brain in children. And so we are interested in basically all the different stages that a child goes through. And then we combine that knowledge with the knowledge from a very old tradition, the oldest system of health in the world, Ayurveda, which had this very profound understanding of body types. And recently, there's been quite a lot of interesting research showing there's a genetic basis to this. So they really understood many years ago that there were at least 3 basic types. And these types, we use the words from that tradition just to honor it, and they are Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, brain-body types. And Vata just is a word from that tradition which means really movement. It has to do with those children who are absolutely the most enthusiastic, the most creative, imaginative. They're slightly thinner than other types. They're always moving around, and they change from one thing quickly to another, but they just have, an amazing learning capacity. They'll be sitting at the table reading a book while eating a meal, even if you ask them not to, because they just want to consume knowledge at as fast a rate as possible. And from our perspective as scientists, we see this as kind of a certain style of brain functioning where the brain can process information very, very quickly. And this particular style also makes them a little more sensitive. So these brain-body types there can be either in balance or out of balance. And that's kind of an interesting perspective. But when they're in balance, they're amazingly creative, quick learners. When they're out of balance, they can become anxious and nervous. So the real key to understanding these brain-body types is how to keep each one in balance. And for the Vata, probably the most important thing is routines. They need routines. They need to know everything that's happening. That provides, it kind of grounds them. It gives a steadiness to their life. And the next type is the Pitta type. And the Pitta type, you could think of fire as sort of the basis. They're the ones that, if they're in balance, enormous energy, focus. They're very competitive in sports, just, moving ahead right in a straight line. They get out of balance, though. That fire can get out of control, and suddenly they lose their temper, become irritable. So the key to this type is having meals on time, especially lunch. If they miss a lunch, it's just so likely they could get irritable and lose their temper. So just a most trivial and simple thing like that makes a huge difference for this type. And also making sure they don't get overheated. Water sports are fantastic for them. But if they're out in the sun too long, again, that kind of fire can turn into anger. The last type is the Kapha type. And I should just mention that really most people are a mixture of one or more types. I'm just giving this kind of easy outline so you get an understanding. But we're all very complex. We all have different aspects to us. So everybody has a little Vata, a little Pitta, a little Kapha. And the Kapha side is the kind of more steady, easygoing, a little slower. They're slower learners, but actually they never forget anything. They just have incredible memories. And, they're the children who are just the most loving, easygoing, friends with everyone. They kind of have that inner stability as a natural part of their life and are very good-natured. But when they get out of balance, they can become withdrawn. They can put the brakes on. You try to get up in the morning, and they take longer than they should. Try to get them out the door, and they take longer. And you try to make some new change in their life, and they're just like, nope, won't do it. So this is a type which you have to really, they're just so loving, they're easy, but you just have to make sure they're in balance and take a little longer with them. They might need a little extra time to get out the door. So this kind of gives you a rough overview of these three types, and as I said, everybody is a mixture. So you can't ever really type anybody, and we don't actually like typing that much. We believe that everybody has maximum potential. Everybody can unfold their lives to be the greatest they can possibly be. But these are really useful ways of understanding a person's nature and kind of getting a feeling for their tendencies, what are their strengths and weaknesses, and how to help boost up their strengths and figure out a way so that you can avoid their weaknesses. So the whole notion here is really one of nurture, not trying to fit anybody into a particular category.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned about the mixture of different types. I did take the test on your website. People might want to know how to access that. Was it dharmaparenting.com?
Exactly. Yeah, it's a DHARMA parenting.com, and there's a free quiz, and you get a 4-page PDF report. And it really does give you an insight into all the knowledge in the book, and it's totally free and easy to do.
Yes, I took it, and I was a big mixture. And I noticed in different categories it changes.
Yeah,
like digestion was one, and what were the other two? The physical.
Well, your kind of physical characteristics and also your mind and emotions. So it actually is more subtle than a lot of the quizzes that are out there, because it really does look at 3 areas of your life, and you can be different in each, as you saw.
Yes,
it gives different percentages, and it's important to know that. You could be a very pitta person and love to be competitive and very goal-oriented, and yet in your sleep you could be a little kapha. You could maybe sleep a little longer than other people, and you could be also a little vata in terms of how you deal with information, so that you're really a quick reader and very creative. But maybe the main characteristic is that you're very goal-oriented and you're very well-organized. But it is fascinating to see the mixture of people and how it can be in different areas.
Now, do children change? Do they start out one, and could they change? Or what age do you start seeing these traits revealed?
Well, it's interesting. You can really see them when they're quite young. A child that is crying, has colic, is really having a hard time, very oversensitive, often will be a vata child because their digestion is more sensitive. They can get overstimulated easy. And if they start off in life a little out of balance for whatever reason, then right away you're going to have, quite a difficult child. Whereas a kapha child, if they start off, fairly on a good track, boom, they go to sleep right easy. They're the ones that make you think, oh, it's easy to have another child. And then, it's one of those things you can actually find out quite early, 3 months or even before, to really know precisely in every area. You have to be 6 months or a year really to get a more accurate sense. But these tendencies don't change. They're kind of the way the brain has been wired genetically, and so you pretty much have them your whole life. You do go through different periods in your life, so if you're a vata, the vata period can change in different times and become more accentuated, but they're like we think of them more like our genetics. And we know that our environment influences our genetics. Certain genes get expressed depending on the kind of environment we have. So obviously there is interaction between our kind of innate tendencies and the environment around us and how it gets expressed. But, you can take the quiz at any time, and what you do is you find out, okay, I've shifted a little bit. I'm a little more this way or that way. And the notion there is that even though you have some basic blueprint, you are very much influenced by your environment. So you do have to keep assessing your current state, and you'll see, particularly you'll see if things are going out of balance. That's the most obvious thing.
What I wanted to know, are any of these things obvious on brain scans?
Well, brain scans are wonderful, fantastic, and we just wrote a paper suggesting it. They are expensive, and they involve, some serious research. We are dying to do it with brain scans, and so we're trying to set up research right now. We've done stuff with EEG, which is a little less expensive, and there we do see differences. So we're expecting with brain scans we will also, but it's an area which, believe it or not, really has not been very well researched, and some of the technology, is just now becoming more accessible and easier to use.
Yeah, that would be interesting to see, wouldn't
We
it?
were really anxious to do it.
You know what, Dr. Wallace, what happens when the parent is one type and the child is another type? Does it get difficult?
It can. The classic case is you have a pitta mom and dad, and they're very goal-oriented. Maybe they were athletes when they were kids, a star tennis player or a football player or whatever. And so, they want to impose that on their child. But if they have like a very sensitive vata boy or girl who really has more of a tendency to go toward music or art, and doesn't have that same physical competitiveness. Maybe they're interested in ballet or gymnastics. It's not like they don't enjoy physical activities. They certainly do, but not quite the same team competitiveness. So it's really, really important, and we really emphasize this throughout the book, that it's the parent imposing their brain body type on the child just doesn't work. It never works. And you really have to allow your child to find their own path in life, their own journey. And it really, of course, a Pitta mom and dad can be very good for a Vata child because they're organized, they have everything laid out carefully. And that's what a Vata child needs. They need that kind of help and grounding from a parent. But it's a kind of delicacy. You don't want to impose it. You want to use your own strengths to help your child, but let them find their own way and bring out their own tendencies and strengths.
Yeah, I can see how that can be very helpful. I have 3 children. I have 5 grandchildren. As we're going through this, I'm picturing, I think this one is this and this one is this, and their children are this. So I can see how knowing your body type and your strengths and weaknesses in your children's can really be helpful. It
is.
In
I've got 4 children, 2 boys, 2 girls, and I've also got 6 grandchildren.
Okay.
And I can tell you, if I just take, the simplest example of my 2 boys, you watch at the earliest age, one would eat so fast that food would disappear before you got the plate on the table, it was gone. The other hadn't even started until everybody was finished. They were just so different.
Yes.
And it was always curious. You'd always think, well, why is that? And then as I began to understand these different tendencies, it became very clear, and it was kind of fun and easier to understand the differences.
Yeah, I wanted to chat, too, about the second tool that I'm very interested in, the Heal Yourself tool. And you listed 7 different things parents can do to heal themselves. And so I thought if you can just chat a couple of my favorites, meditation and exercise and not getting too tired. What can you say about those? Well,
I think we all know, that as a parent, if you're tired, there's no hope. I mean, it's kind of like, kids have an amazing amount of energy, and they can just run us around in circles. And if we get tired, we lose it. We kind of have meltdowns and might get angry, irritable, start yelling. And none of that really does any good at all. And so I'd say, that fatigue is the enemy. It's just doesn't help any parent. And yet, how can you avoid it? I mean, my gosh, that's, if you're a single mom taking care of kids, you got a job, you got to take care of the kids. It's extraordinary what people do these days. And I think we recognize that, but we still want to emphasize to everybody that, rest is super important. And if you have to get some kind of help from your spouse, or you have to get, relatives coming in, that's so key. And as you mentioned, meditation is a fantastic tool to rejuvenate yourself. Dr. Travis and I have been studying transcendental meditation. This is one particular technique for many, many years, and there's some terrific studies on it. I mean, really good studies that, in fact, the United States Institutes of Health, National Institutes of Health, have given $25 million to our university to study its effect on cardiovascular disease, and quite amazing studies. I mean, the last one, which was done at University of Wisconsin over 5 years, found a 48% decrease in risk of heart attacks, strokes, and deaths in groups practicing transcendental meditation as compared to the control group. And these were people who already had serious heart disease. So that's pretty fantastic. And there's research in many different areas. The Department of Defense has just given several $1 million for big grant looking at people with PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome, and finding out, how TM can help veterans who've come back and have suicidal tendencies and depression and so forth. And the results so far have been very good. So it's a great tool. I'm not saying that moms have PTSD, but some days might seem like it, And it is like a war zone when you've got a bunch of kids running around doing stuff. But in any case, I think just that 20 minutes twice a day, it's like a huge vacation. It just gives you a break. You can recharge your battery, get some perspective on what's going on, really kind of dive deep within and have a moment of real silence and rest. And we strongly encourage all parents to do that, as well as, like you said, exercise, good food, all the other things that everybody needs to do. But the two highest in our list are really rest and transcendental meditation.
Sounds great.
We'll talk more with Dr. Wallace about Dharma Parenting in a moment. But right now, I'd like to take a brief break and tell our listeners a bit about our game on Facebook called A Better World. A Better World encourages habits of goodness, positive mindsets, and giving to social causes to make a positive difference in the world. Players do things like express gratitude, share acts of kindness, send get-well notes to real-world sick children, and much more. You can find out more at abetterworld.com. So now let's get back to our conversation with Dr. Robert Keith Wallace, co-author of Dharma Parenting. Hi, Keith. This is Greg.
Hi, Greg.
So the third tool as part of the Dharma collection of tools is attention and appreciation. I'll tell you a short story. Last night my wife and I were out running some chores. My kids were at my mother-in-law's, and when we came to pick them up, she had done a bunch of little tasks for my mother-in-law, and she wanted to show me each one. So I let her take me around the house, showing me each little thing she did. And every time I paid attention to it and congratulated her for it, she got happier and happier and came more and more alive. And when I put her in the car to come home, she was glowing, and she turned to me and she said, "I love you, Daddy." And it was really powerful. And, I thought about that a lot when I read again the chapter today on attention and appreciation. Can you tell us why that's so important and what effect that has on children?
Well, I think, all the work you do, obviously, as a parent and as a professional, is oriented toward this, and I congratulate you very much for the wonderful things you do.
Thank you.
Attention is people don't realize this, but literally everything changes our brain. Every experience we have changes our brain. And, when a child is very young, there's so much change going on in their brain. From the ages from 0 to 3, you look at your little baby sitting over there thinking they're so quiet and nice. 24 million connections are being made in their brain every minute. 24 million. I mean, this is like huge dynamic activity going on. They're just, they've got a brain that's not really been assembled. It's got all the cells, but all those connections have to be made. And those connections are made based on the kind of experiences they have. Some are made, to set down the basic pathways, but so many things are based on a notion of whatever we experience, that reinforces that pathway. So if somebody's yelling at us and screaming at us, it's those pathways that get laid down in the brain and get reinforced over and over again. And they change how we react to stress for the rest of our lives. People have done a lot of different studies now looking at what happens to children when they're brought up in harsh environments or environments where they have no attention. And it's quite dramatic. I mean, genes get changed. The different genes, some are expressed, some aren't. Biochemicals are changed. Neural pathways are changed. It's very powerful what happens. I mean, one study in Romania, which is sort of the opposite of what you said, they didn't give these kids any attention. They had some psychologist had a bright idea that if they were brought up in a clean, quiet environment, everything would be good. But nobody paid any attention to these children in an orphanage. and they just had enormous problems. And if a lot of American parents adopted them, but if they were adopted early, change could happen. But if they were adopted too late, it was very difficult to change them. Attention is vital for the connections in the brain, and it is something that the quality of attention is so important, the kind of attention, because that will form a particular circuit or pathway in the brain, the levels of biochemicals. And some of these pathways will be with us forever and ever. And as we go through life, we may have been told by our mom, in a tough way, you've got to be on time. So, we're always looking over our shoulders, stressed out. We're not on time. And it wasn't our mom's fault. She was just trying to lay down, good rules and behavior. But if it's done in an easier, more loving, more appreciative way, then those pathways are, you can have the same good habits, but you can have them in a way where we don't experience stress every time we do them. And again, this is one of the things that's been seen over and over again in studies on parenting. If you take a parent who's very authoritative and sometimes uses, physical punishment, that can backfire. Even though you can get the child to behave at a young age, when they become teenagers, they very often have more drugs, more alcohol, more disciplinary problems. And likewise, if you're too permissive, if you, kind of the old hippie way, let the children do everything, let them do whatever they want, that's a disaster. I mean, they need boundaries. They need to have very clear guidelines. They need your attention in a very positive way, and not having attention is not good. And so what everybody has found, and everybody agrees now, is the best possible, approach of parenting is one that has very clear, good boundaries, some that are more important than others, like don't drink and drive, that's an absolute. Other things like curfew can be negotiated. But ultimately, the key concept here is that these pathways are given with love and always open communication, always in a manner that's positive. And that inevitably lays down the absolute best circuits in the brain. The kid becomes more empowered. They becomes more self-sufficient. Self-regulation is a huge thing that people have studied. And, okay, what does it mean? It sounds like a kind of funny word, self-regulation. It means how well a person can kind of handle themselves in different situations. They do this one test. I don't know if you ever heard about it, but it's called the marshmallow test. Mm-mm. And it's this funny thing where they, a bunch of psychologists cooked up this thing where they put a kid in a room and give him a marshmallow on a plate, and they say, now, if you can wait 3 minutes, we'll give you 2 marshmallows. And then they leave the room, and the poor kid, you watch these kids on videos, they have them on videos on YouTube and stuff, and you see these kids they're like, oh my God, what am I supposed to do? And some kids, it's too much. They have to eat the marshmallow, and other kids, they develop all kinds of strategies for how they're going to avoid eating that marshmallow. But the most interesting and bizarre thing is that is one of the best predictors of how a kid will succeed in life. It's better than SAT scores. It's better than all kinds of other things. So helping a kid learn how to kind of have some ability to regulate their lives, where you're not watching over them every second, but they have to figure out on their own, that kind of attention, that kind of coaching, that kind of attention is super. It really, really, builds a kid's character, builds their ability to be more self-sufficient. So this is a very, very powerful tool. And, as you gave a perfect example, it can just brighten up a kid's day every day if you just give them more attention.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's something in the Yoga Sutras, experience turns into habit and habit hardens into character. And I'm hearing that in what you're saying.
Absolutely. I mean, habit is one of the most powerful things in the world, and habit is a brain circuit. If you want to talk about habits Habits are just some pathway that's been laid down in the brain, and it's reinforced over and over again by us doing that habit over and over again. That's why habits are so hard to break.
Yeah, sure.
Because it's physical. I mean, there's something physical there, and you have to create another pathway that can, if it's a bad habit, you've literally got to create a whole other pathway, and so that pathway will fall away because where you put your attention grows stronger. This is a very beautiful, also yogic saying, and it really has to do with the brain.
Yeah.
If you put your attention on something, that reinforces one pathway. If you take your attention away, that pathway will fall away. So habits, yes, that's that's what happens. Why, that's how we really influence our children for the rest of their lives, by laying down these brain circuits that form into habits in their lives.
Let's chat about routine, actually, because obviously routine and habit are so closely related. That's the fourth tool you talk about in the book. I'll tell you one other quick story about my daughter. This summer, she was at lots of different summer camps, and she's very Vata, and we had her in multiple camps, and even sometimes between camps, we had her a week or two home so she could spend more time with my wife and I, and it was a disaster. She didn't have a routine that she fell into, and so she was constantly very emotionally distraught because she just didn't know where she was headed. So tell us about routines and why they're so important.
Well, I think you could tell me at this point. You've got that's a perfect experience. Yeah, that's true. Vata children, if you give them too many choices, it's not good. They kind of go. It's just too much for them. They really need to be grounded. They need everything to be settled, and then they can just flourish. Routines are different for different types. And, for Vata, they really are essential. They are the grounding of everything. And they really, for a Vata child, should be your number one priority. For a Pitta child, it's interesting. They're quite good at routines. They're just super goal-oriented. You set a list of goals for them, and boom, they just do it. You hardly have to say a word. And the Kapha children are kind of the opposite. They actually like routines too much. They get stuck in a routine so strongly that you have to kind of nudge them out of it occasionally, and you have to help them kind of do more new activities, kind of, be alongside them and get them to do different things. But I think routines are kind of a backbone of a family, and, having all the meals together. Of course, you can't do that for lunch, but when you can, that's wonderful. Having one of the routines we talk about in the book, is sleep routines, so different for each one. Kapha kid, you literally turn out the light, boom, they're asleep. Vata kid, you've got to do, you've got to stop the stimulation an hour early, read a story, maybe a warm bath. I mean, it's quite a challenge. It's different. Their minds are just going a mile a minute, and they got to settle down. And the Pitta kids, a lot will depend upon how much exercise they've had. If they've had a lot of good exercise, no problem, they go to sleep. But they can wake up in the middle of the night. Sleep is not something that they even, care about most of the time. So each type has a different, kind of understanding. But I think one of the best routines that I really never knew about until I started reading, a million different parenting books was family meetings. Family meetings are such an interesting thing, especially when they get older at the teenage, that moment in life when we know they've been occupied by aliens. And that is the moment where you have to have great communication skills with them. Yeah. Every channel has to be open. And family meetings are a terrific way to do that because certain things like curfews or when, doing all kinds of, whether they're, cleaning up the dishes, cleaning up the yard, chores, which we don't think about that much, but they can all be kind of worked out in family meetings. Everybody can have a say. They can voice their concerns. They can learn not to interrupt. They can learn, that they have a say in everything. Everybody gets a chance to speak. And you can kind of talk about, okay, well, for a teenager, you want to have more trust, you want to stay out later. But what happens if you break this trust? What happens if instead of coming at this time, you come in later? What will the consequences be? And then they get involved in making up the consequences. And then they are they're part of the whole process. And so when they break that rule, it's been discussed, it's been talked about in the family meeting, and they're well aware of the consequences because they help make them up. And it's such a kind of amazing tool to help create channels of communication that might not be there if you just have a no, you have to do this, you have to do that, you have to do that. Kids, especially teenagers, their brains are going through a whole different process. They're actually going through what's called neural pruning. I mean, I know this is a hard concept, but you have a child when they're, say 7 years old, 8, 9 years old, they have a thicker cortex than adults. They have more connections than they'll ever have in their life. And so some of those connections have to be pruned because, we get into the brain is very efficient and it kind of has a use it or lose it kind of approach. So if you're using certain pathways, those will be maintained. The other ones will kind of just go away. So teenagers are actually going through a stage where they're pruning their brain. When they go to sleep, they're a different person when they wake up the next morning. And so they can get confused, they can forget things, and they don't have all the connections to the frontal part of the brain, that key area where we have reasoning and make good decisions. So even though they look like adults, they're not everything is online yet.
Right.
And so you have to kind of be aware of that and treat them that way.
Interesting.
And again, these routines, these family meetings, all these things, they're terrific for building that kind of relationship that you need, especially when they get into that confusing teenage time.
Interesting. That is interesting. So let me move us on to the fifth tool about managing meltdowns and cultivating better behavior. I'm not going to share any stories here because we're recording this.
Very wise of you. Very
wise. Every parent has had that experience, and I would love to know some tips and tricks, and not just that, but just ways in which they can, respond and raise their children in a better way to reduce meltdowns. Can you tell us about those 6 C's: the check-in, the comfort, the change, choices, consequences, and coaching?
Yeah, I think, again, there's all kinds of wonderful parenting books out there, and they all have, different ideas of what you do during a meltdown. Sometimes people have quiet times. Sometimes people have, just a wide variety of strategies. We came up with these primarily based, again, on our knowledge of the brain and on Ayurveda, this kind of time-tested tradition. And the first C in this is check in with yourself and your child. If you're at a shopping mall and the kid's crying, you got to be sure you're in the proper state to do this, because if you're upset, if you're tired, you're going to start yelling and screaming, and you're going to be worse than the kid.
Right.
You're not going to really do much help at all. So you got to check in with yourself, see where you're at, and you got to see the child. Is the child really lost? And the first thing you do is comfort the child. Just boom, right away. Because ultimately, most of these problems of meltdown are kind of fear and anxiety and some kind of, something going on inside them. Sometimes it's just missing a meal, like a pitta kid. You take them to the shopping, and then you lost track of the time, and suddenly they didn't have their lunch, and you're just so busy doing stuff you didn't notice it, and they blow up. You can't really blame them. They're just having a physiological response. When they don't eat on time, they get irritable and angry, and it's like hearing Jaws, the music from Jaws in the background. It's just like, it just comes on them. They don't even know what's happening.
Yeah.
So you have to be aware of changing their brain state. You have to be aware that, first of all, this is a brain state. This isn't personal. They're not angry at you. Their brain state has just gone into a meltdown for whatever reason. And if comforting doesn't work, if you have a snack with you, if you can get them to eat right away, maybe you have to just take them out and bring them home and quiet them down.
Yeah.
One dad talked about, taking the kid outside and singing to it. Maybe a Vata kid that just got oversensitive in a confusing environment. And it just needed to be grounded, that child, that girl or boy. And so, but up till now, there's no chance for reasoning. The idea that you tell them you should not do this, why are you? I mean, any kind of reasoning at this point is ridiculous because they're in a emotional meltdown. The parts of their brain that reason aren't online. The emotional centers have taken over totally, and they're just not capable of reasoning. If you can change their brain state, if you can, take them outside, quiet time, get them something to eat, whatever you can do, then you can start the process of actually talking to them. And at that point, then you can give them a choice. They're now suddenly calmed down a bit, and you can decide, do you want to stay here or should we go home right now? Mm-hmm. And, if they can make that choice, that's a better situation. Mm-hmm. Then they've actually decided to go in a more positive path, and that's wonderful for them. And, if they still are angry and defiant, there has to be consequences.
Sure.
Particularly if they're teenagers, you've got to have some consequences. You hope that you've come to those consequences with them. So all you have to do is remind them, well, at the family meeting, we talked about what happens when you, get into a temper tantrum and, start screaming at your mom. We know now that there has to be some consequence to that. And, that's important that you follow through. If you did come to some agreement with them and if you then let it pass, it's just, they're not going to believe you anymore.
Yeah.
So you got to be consistent. You have to know that there are some things that should never be negotiated, like drinking and driving, and things like curfew. They can be negotiated, but not necessarily at that time. At another point, you can negotiate with them and talk about the pros and cons. And the final C is coaching. In the end, you sort of start off as their teacher, then you become their coach, and then you become their counselor. And, coaching is one of those things that's so wonderful. You have a great coach. That coach brings you to new levels. Coach always, creates wonderful challenges, but not challenges that will defeat you. Challenges that will uplift you and make you feel stronger and better so you can do everything in small steps, if that's the way you work, or if you want, if you're one that likes to go in bigger leaps, then the coach has to figure that out. And that's, really the role of the parent, to know their child and know exactly, what kind of coaching they can do to make a better person of their child.
Well, I know the final recommendation in the Dharma toolkit is anticipating and adapting. So how does Dharma Parenting enable a parent to be able to anticipate and adapt to their kid's behavior?
Yeah, we've talked a lot about it, knowing that for a Pitta kid not having a meal on time. You gave a perfect example of your Vata child. If you had anticipated that all those camps, what they would have done, you never would have done it, So it's anticipating is really such a great and wonderful tool. You're going on a long trip. You're going to go for, many hours in the car. If you can have things for them to do, you can create opportunities for them. You can turn a nightmare into a fun.
Right.
And so it's anticipating is just good parenting, knowing who your kid is and how you can help them the best. The final tool, adapt, we just kind of have that as there are going to be situations that you can't cover in a book. There's just too many, possibilities. Kids can be great psychologists. They can figure out things that we don't even imagine, and they can, Dad, I love you. Will you do this for me? And I can't do that. What? Dad, you're the worst. They're masterminds at things, and so you have to really adapt always. You have to be creative on your feet, and that's why being rested is so important. They are marvelously creative and inventive, and so you do have to always be prepared that there will be some situation that won't be in any book, and you're going to have to take a little bit of all these tools and put together the best approach you can.
No, I think that's exactly right. I think every parent knows you have to think on your feet and be creative, because otherwise they'll take you down. Well, let me ask you one last question. It's a question I ask of every guest almost every week. And in this case, how do you hope Dharma Parenting can help families be happier and more fulfilled and therefore make the world a better place?
Well, I think, that knowing who you are and knowing your child and having some tools is an enormous help. I mean, you think about it. People get married and they have kids and they become parents. They never took a course on parenting. All they learned was from their own parents, who may or may not have been good. When they go to college, nobody tells them to take a course on parenting, even though actually that's going to be the biggest part of their lives. That's going to be more important than their business. It's going to be more important than everything, how their kids are. So this is like insanely important, and yet we don't really prepare young people for being parents. So I think, we absolutely have to give more help to young people. We have to provide them with more tools, more training. It's always a big surprise when you have your first kid and you never put on a diaper and suddenly you got to do it. I mean, it's like, oh my gosh, I got to read this in a book and figure out how to do this. So I think, Dharma Parenting can be a great help. It's not only for kids. That's the interesting thing. I've had, people come to me who don't have kids, and they've read the book, and they said this was amazing because they learned about themselves, they learned about relationships. A lot of, family life is relationships. And the more you know about yourself and your tendencies, your strengths and weaknesses, and the more you know about the other members of the family, the better you can be, the more positive you can be, the more you can focus on people's strengths and not their weaknesses, the more fulfilled you can be. So it's really, I think, family life is crucial to the world. I think that's what we've seen in the world more than anything is a loss of family life. People live in different areas. They're not with their parents or far away. It's just kind of gotten crazy, and we don't have that huge support of families that has been so powerful and so helpful for people throughout the ages. And certainly, people have developed all kinds of weird parenting styles which are not good. And so we really, really need to help parents everywhere. And it needs to be something that's really given freely and given in a very wise and positive way. And I think if we want to make the world better, we should help our kids, because really so much of what happens to how a kid gets transformed, this charming little child turns into an adult, a teenager first, and then an adult. And, sometimes people can't even recognize the difference between this little cute little child and this very demanding adult. And so something happened in between, and it's parenting. And parenting formed those neural pathways. So if we want to change the world, we should help create more positive, more wonderful children and help parents do that.
You can learn more about Dharma Parenting by going to dharmaparenting.com. Dr. Wallace, thank you so much for joining us today on BetterWorldians Radio.
Thank you.
BetterWorldians Radio is brought to you by BetterWorldians Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit whose mission is to make the world a better place by encouraging the best in everyone. We believe it is essential to plant flowers, not just pull weeds. We focus on positive thinking, positive values, and positive actions. In short, our vision is to bring out the better world in everyone, so we can all make it a better world. But we can't do it without your help. Donations support our BetterWorldians Radio podcast, as well as go toward developing new features like articles, videos, blogs, and much more. We need the help of BetterWorldians like you to ensure our mission's success and future. Go to BetterWorldians.com to be a part of this important mission. And until next time, please, be a better Worldian.